How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Vindaga Games, where I make a huge mess and come out with another project. Today we're going to be making a dragon, particularly a black dragon. This is a green dragon that I had made a little while back. I've done some modifications to it over time. I think it just looks really cool. And I kind of wanted to go through and cycle through a lot of the colors, so the next one I'm going to be doing is a black dragon. And that's going to be our project for today. These guys are a little more elaborate than your standard just cardstock miniatures and tokens that we've been working on. So I'm going to show you guys how I do it. It's a little complicated, but it's a lot of fun. It gets really messy, but I think you guys will like it and find it entertaining. So without further ado, let's get into this project. So here we're going to be using SPX foam board. You can get this at any hardware store, and we're going to be cutting it into small bits so we can take it over to our foam cutting table. We're also going to use cardstock as well. Here's the foam cutter. It's got a nice wire that heats up. It's got a sliding guide to help keep straight cuts, as well as a temperature gauge to melt the foam at different heats, and a power button. So to start off, we're going to measure 8 inches from nose to tail for this dragon, and we're just going to sketch out. This will take different shapes as we move along, so it could change as we go forward with the project. Getting the basic shape and outlines, I was inspired by the Dungeons & Dragons depiction of their black dragon they have in their module. It inspired me for this project, and so I wanted to make it. Probably doing a few variations here and there as well. Once you get the sketch out, we're going to take this guy to the hot wire table, and we're going to get cutting these shapes out. So here we're using the hot wire table cutter to cut around and get around these lines. Here I went out of the lines just a little bit. I decided I wanted to change the shape just a little bit, but that's okay. And this is just keeping a steady hand on this, keeps it from pulling that hot wire too much and kind of causing the wire to warble a little bit and kind of mess up and make a weird funny cut. So going nice and slow with this is really important. Also keeping your fingers well away from the wire so you don't get burned. And here with cutting the tail and the neck off and the limbs, you can get some really intricate cuts with this thing. Here we're just going to be shaping the parts of the body here, doing some different angles and edges so we can get this general shape. Cutting at an angle here so we can get narrower at the top of the head and thicker as we go towards the neck. It will be the same with the tail as well, and we're going to be kind of trying to curve around some of these pointed edges to give this more of a, add some curves to this thing as well so it doesn't look so blocky. Some of this just takes some playing around with the wire and cutting it at different angles and lengths, just until you get to a point where you're satisfied with it. Especially around the limbs, kind of cutting them in a way that makes them look more limb-like instead of just this flat piece. These get a little more intricate than your standard miniatures you make with the paper, but it's a fun part of the project. And anyone that's willing to invest in a hot wire table, I highly recommend it. It's a lot of fun. You do have to wear face protection, though, with a respirator. I have a half mask respirator that you've seen in my previous video. When you're cutting this stuff, it does release some fumes, and so you want to make sure you're protecting your lungs when you're doing this, and make sure you have adequate ventilation as well. I have this table situated right underneath the window so that the fresh air blows in, and I have a cross breeze from behind me as well. If you have a fan on, you can turn that on to blow the fumes out the window too. Here we go, we got these all cut out, and I'm just going to go through and I'm going to just kind of trim up the edges a little bit with a knife here, clean up the cuts a little bit, make the edges more round. And the reason I separated the head and the tail from the body in the initial cut was so that I can kind of twist them at a slight angle so that it makes the piece look less like I cut it from one part and instead have like a seamless add some movement to the body when it's all finished up. And you'll see here I'm kind of measuring to make sure I get that fluid motion. So by trimming this up, we can cut around here so that we get a nice matching pattern and get rid of those sharp angles. Much like peeling a potato, you can come along the tail and the neck and the other parts of the body here and just kind of trim off these rough edges, and then later on we'll get a foil ball and we'll kind of take care of any of the other rough edges that still stand out. Here you kind of have to play around and kind of figure out what style of head you want. Like I said, I was inspired by the Dungeons & Dragons black dragon that's depicted in their book. I really like the style and the way it looks. Here we get to do the same thing with the limbs, trimming them up, and now we're ready to glue. So with this, using a hot glue gun here, normally I use the tacky glue, but tacky glue is kind of hard to come by right now for some reason, so I'm relying on my hot glue gun that I've had sitting in the shelf for a long time. Preparing this guy with some toothpicks. We're going to hot glue gun this thing together. And I know the hot glue gun is a favorite among crafters, and they like to use this thing to hold things together. It goes really quick. It seals really fast. It does get really hot, so you have to give it a second to cool down before you touch it. And then it leaves little wisps of glue around, so you have to make sure you clean that up with a toothpick or a Q-tip if you have one laying around. And I apologize for the weird camera angle here. It got kind of slid down just a little bit, so now the project's way down there. So I apologize for that. But here you can see me just gluing this thing together, twisting the head and the tail just off to one side so that it makes it look less cut out and more, gives it some more lifelike pose. Continuing on with the gluing here. This stuff seals really fast, so I try to do one bit at a time. And it's looking great so far. It stands up. For the next part, we're going to get a Q-tip, and we're going to put some holes on the shoulders. These are going to be the wing muscles. So we're going to just lather this thing up in hot glue, and we're going to stick it right on the base here. Do both sides. So far, I'm really liking the hot glue and the way it works. I think I'm going to use this for a lot more projects. I'm really liking the results I'm getting from it, and later on in the project, it paints over pretty well, so I think it's a good choice to make. Tacky glue works better for the cardstock miniatures and gluing the paper together and the wood to the paper. But since we're not using any wood here, and we're going to be using foam to cardstock later on, we're going to be using the hot glue gun for this project. Adding some detail with this permanent marker. The permanent marker helps kind of melt the foam. The acids in the pen kind of help melt it a little bit, so it gives those deep grooves and has some great looking textures. Just giving it some scales as we go along here on the belly as well. Get some nice deep cuts in there. Once that's all done, I have these pre-cut out wings, parts of the face, and the frill, the spines that go along the top of the neck. We're going to bend these into shape, and then we're going to hot glue them onto the body. And here, don't be too generous with the glue. I was a little bit too generous and made a little bit of a mess, but I made it work. Pasting those on. Adding a little bit of glue to the front of the face as well to kind of help press it together. Glue along the base of the neck and the wing muscles as well, making sure everything's sticking in place. Once you get done with this part, you'll just come along the wings and kind of just make sure that the wings are sealed on. So we're going to press this onto the muscles and onto the body. Keep in mind the glue will probably still be hot, so you want to make sure you take your time and don't go too fast with this, and do one wing at a time. Here we're cleaning up the edges to hide the seams, strengthening them, cleaning up the wisps, and we're going to let it dry. And don't forget the tail piece, very important. There it is. It's all dried up, and I think we're ready to paint. So before we do that, I got these pieces of paper here that we're going to twist. I wasn't going to add horns to this thing, but as I looked back at the Dungeons & Dragons module and saw the cool look of the black dragon there, I decided I wanted to give it the horns like a bull, because I think it just adds so much character to it. Almost gives it a kind of like a Maleficent dragon, Disney's Maleficent dragon kind of look, and I really think that's really classy looking. So we're going to do that. Hot glue them to the head. Perfect. Now we're ready to paint. So using just a flat black, we're going to do the first base coat on this dragon. Cover the entire thing. One thing to keep in mind too when you're painting the cardstock is the glue will hold it to the base of the body, but the thing to keep in mind too is the paint's going to get the cardstock a little bit wet, so really be careful where you place it, because it will mess up the paint job a little bit, so you want to make sure it dries really well. Now that that's done, we're going to add a little bit of silver to the gray here. Or excuse me, not silver. This is the gray and the black, so we're going over the wings here. Silver comes later. We're going to just make this guy's spine and wings just more of a grayish tone. We're going to go along the back. Now we're going to go over with a metallic black, a glossy black, and this silver color. This is where this comes in, and we're just going to go over the very back scales of this guy, kind of following along the markings that we did with the permanent marker as well as the face. And it's going to add just a little bit of a shiny tone to it. Give it some character so that this dragon is not just a black color, because you don't want a miniature that's just a solid black blob. You want to make sure that it has some dynamic colors and really stands out, and that the colors really jump out at you. So go along the sides of this guy with just a gloss black as well. Gives it some distinctive tones. Now here we're going to add this antique gold color to the gloss black. And with this we're going to do the underbelly. This is the other palette that the Dungeons & Dragons Black Dragon has, as well as he's got this kind of this shiny-ish gold colored underbelly, which I thought looked really cool. I thought about doing a purple belly, kind of like the Maleficent dragon from Disney, but I decided to go and stick to my guns on the Dungeons & Dragons style. So here we are with the metallic gold painting the belly, and I think it turned out really cool. So now we're going to go to the gray, and we're going to touch this guy up on the horns and the claws, just to help those pop out and give them some distinction. After that, we're going to kind of play around with different color palettes too. Going to need to make sure this guy's got some pretty good teeth, so we're going to get some white and just very carefully touch up these teeth with the white paint. That's looking good. Add some of this gold to the chin. And now we're going to do the eyes. I'm using a celery green and a bright yellow. I'm just going to mix these two together. Give it like a neon green eye color. Just very gently and carefully. Now we're going to dry brush over the wings with this glossy gray color that we got going on here. I went a little too heavy on here. You could stand to go a little lighter with this stuff, but I was able to fix that with adding a little more of the dark gray, and it ended up working really well and turning out really awesome looking, giving it this aged look. Next, I'm coming over with my brush pen, and this I'm just adding some details around the eyes. I'm going to be going around the mouth with it just to give it some definition, as well as giving it some spots along the face. Then we're going to add details along the spine and the wings as well to kind of touch up the pointy ends and the claws on the wings. And doing some heavy black lines on there really just helps those spines to pop out and add some definition. We're going to also add some black to the claws of the wing tips as well, and this should wrap up our project. Now give it a long time to dry, and it's going to be ready to get on the battlefield and terrorize your players. And there he is. I think it turned out pretty good. I'm quite happy with this one. Things got a little scary with the horns a little bit. I was having trouble getting those to work properly, but in the end I think the result is awesome. I really am happy with this build. If you guys enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe if you have not done so you're notified when I drop future content. I got a lot of great projects in store, and I can't wait to get those out and share them with you all. But in the meantime, I hope you guys are staying safe and healthy. Have a great and wonderful rest of your day, and until we meet again.